All right, so in the last episode of the Spotted Pod, I went through a bunch of off-season questions, that the Spurs are going to face this coming off-season, and in there, I talked about the kind of two routes they could look at building the roster for this coming season in 25-26. And so I said that they could go the more like safe approach of basically like using their draft picks to fill roster needs on the roster, or using like the non-tax mid-level exception, or making some trades where they're not doing any kind of blockbuster deals. But then I did talk about how yes, they could, because they have the future picks, they have some movable contracts. They could get in those blockbuster deals. When I mentioned there was the example of Kevin Durant. Well, another player's name is now going to start getting into trade rumblings, most likely, and that's going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo, because let me just talk about why Giannis's name is going to be mentioned in trade rumors. He could be mentioned in trade rumors this offseason, and then why the Spurs, whether there's been no reporting that they're interested in him right now, but again, they could end up getting linked to him, and I'll explain why here as well. So here's some of the reasons why you might see Giannis's name in trade rumors this summer. One, the Milwaukee Bucks were eliminated in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs by the Indiana Pacers in just 5 games. We know that Dame Lillard was coming back from the blood clot issue. He comes back and then he gets hurt, and he suffers a torn ACL. They're in the series, so he's out. So again, they lose in 5 games. The Bucks. Number 2 is Dame's situation, his health situation. One, he's 34 years old right now. He's going to turn 35 in the summer. Again, he has a torn ACL at that age. And RotoWire.com has his estimated return date as March 1st, 2026. So he's basically missing almost all of next season. If he's lucky enough to make it back for next season, it'll be right before the playoffs start. So basically, Giannis and the Bucks are having to go into the season without their second best player, Dame, not being able to be there because of the injury situation. And Dame's deal, contract wise, is that he's hurt, so it would be hard to trade him if they were trying to trade him, because he's going to be out basically most of next season. He's also, like I said, 35, turning the summer, and then he still has 2 years left on his deal at the max. The second year is a player option. So again, that's another reason. That's the second reason why the Bucks, there could be some Giannis trade rumblings. The third reason is that the Bucks are kind of limited with their future picks situation, so they don't even have their own first round pick in this coming draft in 2025 in June, in about a month, and then also in 2026 the New Orleans Pelicans can swap with Milwaukee. There's a pick swap there, so the Pelicans get to choose. Do they want their own pick, New Orleans' pick, or do they want the Bucks' pick? Whichever one's better, New Orleans is going to take that pick. Financially, the Bucks do have a little bit more flexibility than they did before the trade deadline. So because they moved Chris Middleton for Kyle Kuzma, it gave them a little bit of leeway getting under the second apron, both for this season and then also going into the summer. And so, reading Bobby Marks of ESPN, one of the things he does is he does these off-season articles where he kind of just gives a good picture of where everybody's at going into the off-season. And so Bobby's main takeaways were that, yes, there's a little bit more financial flexibility for the Bucks. They're not like the Suns, who are like in that second apron where they have very few limited moves. So basically, Bobby says that they can still re-sign some of their own free agents. They have like Brook Lopez coming up. Bobby Portis has a player option he can opt out of. Gary Trent Jr. who had a good playoffs, also is a free agent who was only on the minimum. So it gets kind of tough for Milwaukee to re-sign him with his bird rights. They would have to use their non-tax MLE of like $14 million. They can participate in some trades. It makes it a little bit easier. But the tough part is that for Milwaukee is that, according to Bobby Marks, is that they can't move their big salaries, players like Dame or Kyle Kuzma, because they can't move multiple first round picks. The earliest they can trade a pick is 2031 or 2032, but they can't tie 2 or 3 picks together. And again, if you're trying to move Kuzma's contract, who he didn't have a good season with Milwaukee past February, or Dame because of his injury situation, plus he's going to be 35. Again, it's hard to move those contracts unless you're attaching a pick to them, and it's hard to do that when you can't attach multiple picks. So again, that's where they're in a little bit of a tougher situation to kind of still build a championship core around Giannis with the limited moves they can make financially and with their pick situation. Now, I want to be clear, Giannis has not asked for a trade. That's one of the big things we got to keep in mind here, is that yes, the rumblings are going to start coming out. Us as media, we see this. It looks like Milwaukee doesn't really have a bright future for Giannis, where they could put a championship contender. So that's why we started looking at possible trades and those kind of things. But we do want to be clear though, for now, Giannis has not asked out of Milwaukee. So again, this is all right now just like early speculation, just because of the situation, like I outlined, that the Bucks are in. And typically when a top three player right now, an MVP candidate, is in this situation, and it looks kind of bleak right now to try to get back into the title race. It looks like Milwaukee's very far, so that's why it wouldn't be surprising if Giannis did end up asking for a trade out of Milwaukee this summer. Now, why is the Spurs' name mentioned here in a possible if Giannis asks out? It's because of where the Spurs are kind of like Houston, kind of like OKC, where they have a lot of young players. Then they also have a lot of picks. So again, if there was ever a moment that a player like Giannis is available on the trade market where he asks out and Milwaukee's looking for the best deal, then that's where the Spurs' name could come up, just because again there's a chance to get an MVP candidate player, caliber player here in Giannis, if he were to ask out for the trades, ask out of Milwaukee. But also, so that's why teams like San Antonio, teams like Houston, who have a lot of draft capital, who have a lot of young prospects, young players on their teams, that's why those teams' names start getting linked right away to Giannis in the event that he does ask out. Just looking at Giannis's contract situation. He's making $48.7 million this season. So again, if there was a deal done between now and June 30th, that's the salary you're working with, is $48.7 million. Next season, after July 1st, he's going to make $54.1 million as a max player. And then the following season, 26-27, he's making $58.4 million. And then in 27-28, that summer, he has a player option for $62.7 million. And he will, between now and 26-27, he's going to be age 30 to about 33 during those 3 years. So if you trade for Giannis, you have him under contract for about two more seasons here, from age like 30 to 33. Now, I'm not going to get super detailed into trade scenarios here. What I really want to do is just look at more open-ended questions, again, just like I did in the last episode. Now, instead of Kevin Durant talking about Giannis possible trades. So like one of the big questions for the Spurs is, if Giannis wanted out and the Spurs were going to start calling Milwaukee, obviously the Bucks want, of course, the picks. They're going to want the draft capital. So the Spurs have that part. Again, we don't know how many picks, how many swaps they want, etc. But who are the young prospects that the Bucks want, the young players, and so that obviously is Stephon Castle, because obviously we know that the Spurs wouldn't include Wemby in those trade discussions, but that's where it gets interesting, is after winning the Rookie of the Year, are the Spurs ready to if Milwaukee wants Castle in a trade and that's the deal breaker, are the Spurs okay with moving him? So that's one of the key questions. Again, Giannis is the top 3 MVP candidate this year. So again, I would say, obviously, for me, I would say yes, but obviously that's a different scenario for the Spurs. We saw that they had a big presentation for Castle when he got his Rookie of the Year award, where David Robinson, Wemby, and Tim Duncan were all there on stage with him in a little celebration for him getting his Rookie of the Year. So again, that's one of the big questions early on, is the Bucks are going to want the Spurs' best young player outside of Wemby, because the Spurs will not trade Wemby, and so that's where Castle, are the Spurs ready? Would they be willing to move him? Also, one of the key questions is, from Milwaukee's side, how do they view Castle? Obviously, the Spurs view Castle very, very high, and so do a lot of teams in the league. But are the Bucks, maybe they view someone from like Houston, if they get involved in trade negotiations, maybe they get, if OKC doesn't do well in these playoffs, maybe they like a player on OKC's team. Those kind of teams that have the draft capital plus the young players, maybe Milwaukee likes somebody else on those teams as well. Over Castle. That's something else to look at. And then, like I said, there's going to be negotiations if word gets out that Giannis wants out, because then it's the opposite of the Lakers situation with Luka, where the Lakers and Mavs were kind of just talking quietly. They didn't let it get out, because obviously if it got out that Luka was available, a bunch of teams would have jumped in with better offers than what the Mavs got. And so obviously if Giannis says he wants out, then of course that's going to trickle down to all the front offices. They're going to get word, and so they're going to start sending the best packages to Milwaukee, and then Milwaukee can start figuring out raising the price level of what teams want, getting better assets, getting better young players in deals, and going with whichever team is best for whichever deal is best for their franchise. So again, that's another question to consider on Milwaukee's end as well. And then again, one of the big questions I have too is would Wemby be okay with this? Obviously, I think that fit wise on the court, it would be great. Defensively, he and Giannis again, two really good versatile defensive players can just dominate that end of the court. Offensively, I think they'd figure it out. We know that Giannis is more of an attack inside player, can dominates inside, and then Wemby has that versatile skill set where he's able to shoot the three. He's able to go inside, dominate with his height as well, and playmaking and things like that. And so I think they can make it. They can make it work. But I also wonder, more so, is he okay with, adding another superstar so early in his career where they're not forming that big three? There's going to be, would be him, Fox, and Giannis. And so I don't know. It wouldn't be Wemby's fault because he's just under contract. It's not really his say. He's just, going into his third year. But, if let's just say they dominate, they win a title or two or three, and then, is there going to start getting that backlash to either Wemby or Giannis? Like Giannis took the easy way out. He went to to join a young superstar in Wemby, getting that like early LeBron Heat kind of backlash, that KD Warriors kind of situations for either he or Giannis. Again, that's something just to look at. And then also, and even though it wasn't really Wemby's fault because he's just on his rookie contract, as far as Giannis, if Giannis were to get traded, it's not really his call as much. It's more so like the organization wanted, took that chance to go get a top 3 MVP caliber player. And then also I would just say too is that does this kind of stunt Wemby's growth on the offensive end? Where, like I said, I think that he and Giannis would be awesome defensively. Offensively, like I said, I think they can make it work. It's more so like right now, Wemby has that flexibility, that freedom to kind of just figure out his game. We saw him, early on be more of an outside shooter early on the first few months of the season. Then he kind of went more to a balanced approach, and so he might lose that a little bit when it's more of like a give and take kind of offense, and then you still have Fox there. So again, I just don't know how much that was trying his offensive exploration, I guess you would say, in his creativity and his skill level over there on the offensive end. So again, those are just some of the guiding questions I did want to get into in the event that the Spurs in the event that one, Giannis asked out of Milwaukee, but then two, in the event that the Spurs did start looking at some trade possibilities to get him. Now, because of where Giannis' salary is at, and like I said, if the Spurs and Bucks were to get into a trade discussions, of course, I think that Castle would definitely have to be included in a deal for Giannis. And so I just want to look at some very basic, just more so for the contract wise, what would have to work to get Giannis to San Antonio and vice versa, the Spurs players to Milwaukee. So they could do a deal before June 30th where Giannis' salary is at about $48.7 million. To do this, there's like two example deals here. The Spurs can send Castle, Devin Vassell, and Jeremy Sohan to Milwaukee for Giannis, and of course the picks. And then another example of a deal is Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, and Castle for Giannis. Again, if you're in Milwaukee, you want the one that includes Castle, Vassell, and Sohan because Vassell's still on a pretty good contract, still kind of figuring out his game at the NBA level. And then Sohan is still he's about to go into the final year of his contract before he can become a restricted free agent. But maybe Milwaukee gives him more opportunity to kind of figure out his game than right now currently in San Antonio. Now, if the Spurs and Bucks, again, it's just a very big hypothetical question. It's like if they were to have negotiations go on after July 1st, so after June 30th, then Giannis's salary increases to, what did I say, $54 million. So now to get Giannis to San Antonio, you can do a deal like Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, or Harrison Barnes and Stephon Castle. You could do a deal like Vassell, Sohan, and Castle for Giannis, like the one I outlined earlier. And then also without Vassell included, you could do a deal like Barnes, Keldon, and Castle for Giannis. Again, Milwaukee probably wants the best players in that deal, or younger players, and so they'd probably go with the Vassell, Sohan, and Castle offer if that was the one if that was one of the pitches that was presented to them. So again, these are all just hypotheticals. Like I said, the key thing to watch right now as far as any kind of Giannis movement is going to be, does he ask out of Milwaukee? If word gets out that he wants out of Milwaukee, then that's where it starts getting a little interesting. And again, that's where the Spurs' name, even if there's no articles written like Spurs are interested in Giannis, that kind of stuff, it's still their name's going to be linked there just because they have the draft assets to try and go get him. They have some of the young players as well to try to make a move for him in the event that, again, he did ask out of Milwaukee. So I just wanted to explore that question as well here in this episode.